got married. Well, actually, I didn't meet a husband. I had already met him. He came to visit. We fell in love, kind of, I think. And we needed to keep dating, so I kind of packed up all my stuff and just moved here with 2 suitcases and never looked back. My first house was in San Francisco, right by the ocean. It was really, really nice. Yeah. The other really compelling reason is because I started doing some research on the internet, and there was a master's program, a multimedia master's program in California State University, East Bay. And it was one of the only ones of the type. Like, there was another one in Barcelona, which I almost ended up at, but decided to come to California instead. And that was a very compelling reason to stay. And I did enroll in that program and finished it.
Cool.
It was good. Well, I actually really liked it. And the biggest reason is because I feel like I didn't fit quite well in Mexico. Just that I'm very liberal, and Mexican society can turn things very conservative in some ways. And also, my career was based on technology, multimedia technology, and they didn't really have a lot of options in Mexico when I graduated. It's like, oh, a website? Yeah, that's like a trend. Okay, we'll pay you like $5, to make a whole website. And I'd be like, no. So, we're talking 1995, so it's a long time ago. But I got really lucky because I was the last batch of people they swore in San Francisco under the INS, which was the Immigration Naturalization Service, right before it became Homeland Security. So I actually, if I remember correctly, I became a citizen on 2001, so like right after September 11th. That was like the last batch before they actually moved to Homeland Security. So the process was actually a lot simpler in some ways than it is now. We had to pay a fine because I entered as a tourist with a legal tourist visa, and I had to pay a fine to get my marriage license. It was about $1,000, and I think that it really helped that we were very technology savvy. We were able to get all the forms. We filled them all out. My husband at the time was very, very good with bureaucracy. So we really kind of hammered through it. It wasn't a bad experience. I think the worst was sitting in San Francisco at 5 a.m, standing in line to go do the interviews and things like that. So it was all right, I guess. I don't remember it as being like a bad process at all, but we had all the paperwork. Like, I had all my, sometimes people have problems because they don't have some paperwork. They don't have their birth certificate or, whatever. And we had everything. So it was very straightforward. And it was actually kind of weird when we had the interview, the marriage interview, and we got, like, the guy, like, we sat down and we were at the very end of the day, and the guy that was interviewing us looked exhausted. And we sat down and he's like, hello, and we were like, hello, and we started talking to him. It was like, oh my God, thank God you guys speak English. This has been the longest day of my life, and it has been really tough. And it's like, this is going to make it easier. So he asked like 3 questions, and he just let us out. Also, I did enter the country legally, which helps a lot. The people who enter illegally tend to have a little bit more trouble. It can cost them a little bit more money and more time. Sure. But yes, I've heard some not so good stories. Sure. People who, have been living here illegally, and then they have a chance to get here to stay illegally, but they've used a fake social security card to have a job, and then they have a really hard time cleaning up that. So it's complicated, but I've been lucky. I had no trouble. Great. The food. I don't know. The only good Mexican restaurant here in Fort Collins is my house, I think. But no, I think the food, but also, see, like in Mexico, I miss my family. That has been really hard, of course. My mom lives in California now, so I go visit her sometimes. I go to Mexico about once a year. And I actually realized something really interesting. I miss Mexico, but from 20 years ago. I don't miss Mexico now. Mexico now is very different than the Mexico I left. But yeah, I think leaving behind friends and family. So like both my grandmothers passed away while I was here. I couldn't go to one of their funerals. I went to the other one, but not the other. So like within 1 year. So it makes it really hard when you're far away and you travel. Just little things, you know. You miss a lot of things that are part of that family unit, and I do miss that, the whole concept of family. I mean, we're here in Fort Collins and we don't have anybody else, right? In Mexico, we like big families, and the cousins, and my daughter's growing up without cousins. I grew up in a bunch of like 10 cousins, and you know, I was one of the oldest ones, and I got to boss people around. That was awesome. And like, my daughter doesn't get to boss anybody around or get bossed by anybody. You know, it's part of the growing experience. I think that whole like being reared by a whole family, aunts and grandmas, and learning from that, and my daughter's missing that, and I resent that somehow, but there's no way to really fix it. I mean, we have a great support system here, great friends, but it's not the same. It's a different kind of community, but it's different, definitely very fulfilling, because it comes like with some of the best things that come with family, and not some of the bad ones, some of that family drama, you know. So that has been really cool. We have friends of all ages here for Collins, and it's been really good. I mean, we're lucky. Myself, not so much. I think the more discrimination I've ever gotten was more gender-based than race-based, and part of it has to do with the fact that I speak English really well. I have gotten some really, really silly comments. Like, for example, I was at a party near Stanford University, and it was packed with Stanford people, and a lady was talking to me, and I got introduced to her, and it was basically, I think I had been in the States for like 3 months, and she asked me where I was from, and I said, oh, Mexico. She said, oh, but you grew up here. And I'm like, no, I grew up in Mexico. And she's like, oh, but you went to college here. I'm like, no, why? She's like, well, your English is so good. I'm like, well, I learned English, you know. And she said, so where do you get your college education? I said, well, I got it in Mexico. And she seriously looked back at me and she said, they have universities in Mexico. And we're talking about an educated person, clearly not educated, but she was hanging out with educated people. And I turned around and I said, well, no, not only do we have universities, but we have like the oldest university in the continent. Yeah, Mexico is kind of like here in a lot of ways, actually. You know, it's not the burros and the guys with the sombrero. But for the most part, I don't feel that. My mother has felt it though. My mother has darker skin than I do. She also speaks wonderful English, except with a much heavier accent. So she has gotten discriminated against, and with her, it's you know, it's compounded as she's female. She is from a minority, and not only that, but she's also, you know, older. So she's gotten that ageism and racism, and yeah. So it's gotten bad at work a couple times, and she's had to endure it because it was the only job she could get. Fortunately, that is resolved now, but yeah, she's gone through some pretty bad experiences. I find it really amusing and really curious, the fact that it is assumed. For example, here in Fort Collins, 2 years ago, I was having a 4th of July party at my house. We made tacos. And we had a friend of mine brought her parents over because they were visiting, and they were a very, very lovely couple from I think somewhere in the Midwest. Anyway, they were a very nice couple, about in their early 60s probably. And the dad asked me if my family had a car or if they used the public transport system. And I'm like, it kind of like caught me, and initially I wanted to get offended, and then I was like, well, I guess it's not his responsibility to know this, right? But I find it really interesting, you know. It's like, yeah, I told him, you know, my dad is a doctor, and actually most families in Mexico, even middle class and lower middle class, and even some poorer families have at least one vehicle, you know. And it's one of those things that he just didn't know or understand. And I said, well, I guess, you know, it's like, why should you? Unless you're really familiar with the culture. And what you have access to in that culture is the migrant workers that come here, and it's really hard to separate and understand that there are educated people in Mexico, and that it's a different life, and it's very much like first world for people that have gone to college and have good lives. And I get it. I mean, most of the people that you talk to are the people that are in service industry, people that are workers, and it's tough to get it. So I don't get annoyed anymore. I just go like, weird. But you can't really judge just by nationality, you know. You can't assume that, for example, Indian migrants are tech workers, you know, or tech support workers, or you can't think that, you know, if you meet somebody that is Chinese, that they're necessarily communist, or, you know, because I've seen this many times, you know. It's like, you know, this person's from Taiwan, they're pretty much like you and me, you know. Initially, when I said I'm from Mexico, and so my experience, the only problem that students have had with teachers that are from other countries is that often they can't understand them because they have a heavy accent. The complaints are not necessarily about the quality of the instruction, and since I do have my Mexicanisms, you know, and I do tend to like start rambling with Spanish words sometimes in class, but for the most part I can just communicate at the same rate that they can, so I don't think I have noticed. Mostly they're curious, they want to know, they want to understand why I'm here and how, and they're curious about like what is it like out there, and for people their age I've gotten a lot of questions. For co-workers, it's mostly they all want to like go with me to Mexico because they want to get shown around the proper way. Yeah, nachos and burritos are not really Mexican.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, burritos, I guess, northern Mexico, but that's not Mexico, really. No, but it's just in general, it's been a great experience.
Good.
Yeah.